What's up, everyone? It's Garrett here, back on the Move.W.Murph channel. Some of you might know, last summer, I walked across New Zealand on Te Araroa. And I'm going to call that TA because no matter how much money you spend on a trail, you might not be able to say it by the time you're through. If you're from a little place called North America, you may have heard of it, you can't really roll your R's very well. No one taught me. I'm building up, taking Spanish lessons on Duolingo. So if that helps, I don't know. I'm going to get into how much money I spent on this trail in the COVID year, which makes things a little bit different. And we'll get into that later in the video. But I took into account how much money I spent on transportation, groceries, restaurants, accommodation, and gear. And it took me 149 days to do this trail. It's roughly 5 months, and I took 30 zeros through the course of it. And that's some stuff we'll get into as well momentarily. But this is going to be a full breakdown of how much money I spent on TA over the course of that summer. It does not include my visa. It does not include my flight into the country. And it does not include any of my base weight or initial gear that I bought before starting this trail. Just the gear that I've replaced. And just some of that transportation around the country. It's so subjective depending on what country you're coming from, how much your flight's going to be, how much your visa is going to be, and what kind of base weight you're rocking in the first place. All of that stuff is very subjective. I'm just going to leave it off the table completely. So I took a very detailed account, and I did it all in United States dollars, just because that's my home currency, and the credit card that I was using along the way converted everything right back to US dollars. Hopefully you have a credit card that will not charge you a conversion fee. Watch out for that. And at the very end of this video, I'm going to give you 5 tips on how to save a bit of cash as you're doing your TA experience or another through trail along the way. So let's get into the video. Just to get started, it's fair to note that contextually this is a different year than some of you may have experienced in the past or will in the future. This was a COVID year. And when I started the trail in 2021, most of the North Island, Auckland area specifically, was locked down completely. You couldn't get in and out. There was a whole area that you could just get randomly stuck in. Anytime there was a COVID case, they would just shut it down. No in, no out. And if you were a person like me who didn't have a valid working visa, I could potentially just be stuck there in an Airbnb, purging money, waiting for them to release us. So, contextually, a little bit different. And what I ended up doing was very odd. But I did the North Island northbound from Wellington, which is at the bottom. And I went all the way up to Auckland, and then from Auckland I flew and did the South Island southbound. Finished the South Island in its entirety, and then went back to Auckland and did Northland. That added a little bit of a cost to it. A little bit extra in the transportation department. But it's just a weird year with COVID. There wasn't much I could do. So contextually speaking, things are a little different for me. And my transportation costs are a bit higher. And this was definitely more expensive than I expected it to be in the first place. I expected to spend way less money across the board. And whether that has to do with New Zealand or not, I don't really know. I haven't done a long trail in the U.S. I've done some bike touring. And bike touring, I'll say it was cheaper. A bit cheaper. So, my expectation was far lower cost. Let's break down some numbers. So, my most expensive month was December at $2,072. And my least expensive month was March at $857. That expensive month was that Auckland section right through Christmas and New Year's. I had ample opportunity to spend tons of money, and boy did I. I went all out in Auckland. It was a ton of fun, but it soaked up so much of my budget. So that was my most expensive month. By far, that was a complete outlier. And then my lower end was March month, which was the end of the trail. We were phasing out. I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. I had a spring in my step every morning, and the days were getting real short. So I just walked all day. And that's kind of what I imagine some other trails are more like. You are just in the woods. TA has a special feeling of always being in a town. And I ate out a lot. Food is hard to resist. So yeah, that was my cheapest month. And I had one other month, I think, that was in that similar range of price. My grand total of accommodation was $1,172. That includes all tent sites, Airbnbs, hotels, anywhere I pretty much spent money to sleep. If I'd kick a couple bucks to a trail angel or whatever it might be, all of that was funneled into my accommodation costs. And that includes my backcountry hut pass cost as well. My transportation was $566, and that includes gas money for rides, like shuttles, Wanganui River canoe, boats, ferries, all of the random things that all come together to get you across New Zealand in this trail. That was my transportation cost. And that included a couple of flights to get me to Auckland, back down to Wellington, across, and so on and so forth. All those logistic things that you need to deal with getting around on this trail. So that was my total transportation cost. My total for groceries was $1,617. That's all of my food carries. Anytime I was at an Airbnb and cooked for myself, food I bought from a grocery store, $1,600 total. That wasn't so bad, I thought. I spent nearly as much on eating out at restaurants, $1,447 total, which wasn't so bad. And I spent $1,400 on replacement gear. It was $1,438 to be exact. That's shoes and socks, t-shirts, all of the gear that I already had that just had worn out. That was pretty expensive. That includes replacing a ground pad that got a hole in it in the middle of it, and I just couldn't warranty. Long story short, that includes a ground pad, which was expensive. So my average monthly spending was roughly $1,247, which was about 50% higher than I initially thought. I thought I'd spend between $800 and $1,000. $1,200 was on the higher end. That's my average. As you can see, that Auckland month was really an outlier. That section of the North Island, I spent way too much money up there. So that's roughly what I was looking at on the average month. So that puts me at $3,741 on the North Island, and I spent a total of $2,500 on the South Island. That makes the South Island 33% cheaper than the North Island as a whole. And you really get a lot more bang for your buck on the South Island because you're in way less cities, you're in way less towns. You are constantly sleeping in huts along the way. You're using that backcountry hut pass. You don't need to pay for camping. You don't need to pay for hostels. You are just out there in the woods. So the South Island is far cheaper than the North Island, 33% cheaper. So that brings my grand total trail expenditures to $6,241 US. That, to me, I felt was very expensive. And there are so many variables here. We are on a remote island in the middle of virtually nowhere. Gear was expensive. Transportation adds up real quick. The ferry to the South Island, the flights around, there's transportation areas. The only thing that we really used other than the Wanganui River, and the Wanganui River is one of the coolest sections of this entire trail. It's 5 or 6 days of canoeing down one of the great walks in this beautiful canyon on the North Island. We need to rent a canoe to do it. And I think it costs about $250, $300 per person to do that, plus the food. Then there's tons of other spots up on the North Island where they want you to kayak to get around some things. There's some areas in the South Island that are hazard zones. There's 2 enormous rivers that they want you to take a shuttle around these rivers. And also there are some parts where you should probably rent a bicycle because there's no camping for a really long time. Whatever it might be, there's a lot of logistical add-ups for this trail. Food can be kind of expensive, and then there's that 15% sales tax on everything. I'm having a bit of a debate with my hiking partner. Neither of us had done any other long trails in the US, but I had bike toured. Is it cheaper to thru-hike in a different country? I felt I was relatively modest along the way. and I really didn't go above and beyond. And with all the people we'd hiked with, I felt like I was right in the middle. I wasn't spending the bare minimum, and I wasn't spending a ton. And that was just my experience. Maybe you have spent less. Leave me a comment below. If you've done the TA, how much money did you spend? And if you've done other long trails, like the PCT or the AT, how much money was that? Is this a more expensive or less expensive trail? I'd love to get to the bottom of that. Throw a comment below. Let me know how much you spent on your long trail. Here's 5 tips that I'm going to throw out that'll help you save some money on your long trail based on my experience. The first tip, don't buy backcountry meals unless you absolutely have to. They are so expensive. I broke it down in one of my videos, and I'm going to link a playlist up above of a couple of recipes for the backcountry that I really like and the breakdown of why those meals are so expensive. Make your own food. I really like eating couscous and lentils, but they are so much more expensive. It was, I think, 60 or 70 calories per dollar to eat a backcountry meal, where one of the recipes I'm linking above will be about 500 or 600 calories per dollar. So it's far more efficient with your money to just cook your own food. Make noodles, couscous, lentils, whatever it might be. Find some cold soaking recipes. But those backcountry meals add up so fast. The second tip I'm going to get into is using some gaiters. The number one piece of gear that I replaced on the trail was my socks. All the sand and particles of dirt and things that you pick up with the bottom of your wet shoe get dropped into the opposite side. And I accumulated so much gravel in my shoes that I was constantly either taking them off, dumping them out, but I was just walking holes through my socks because of all of that gravel at the bottom of my shoes. So the biggest piece of gear that you are going to go through are socks and shoes. And if you buy some gaiters, they should last the entire trail, and they will keep all of those things running clean for a lot longer. The third tip is transportation. It gets wildly expensive on this trail, and maybe it's comparable to other trails, but I was astonished, especially when I started looking into some of this stuff. It caught me off guard completely. All of the shuttles, 6, 7, 8 different shuttles that they expect you to take to get around some hazard zones. Maybe 8's a high exaggerated number. It felt like a lot. We'll say 5. About 5 different ways to get around some hazard zones, some kayaks and canoes, and a lot of that stuff can be really fun. I was balling on a budget, so I opted out of a lot of those kayak trips and more expensive shuttles. I did tons of hitchhiking. TA is known for that, so just get out there, stick your thumb out, and meet some people. I'm going to link a video up here of some tips for hitchhiking. Go check that one out. Feel it out. I love doing it, personally. I met tons of great people. But do some research ahead of time and look for alternatives. A lot of times you can just walk. Take a road around, whatever it might be. But there are cheaper alternatives to get around some of these sections instead of paying that high cost. One of the shuttles for 2 rivers was $100 per person, and there's 2 of them. So it's $200 in shuttles. Instead, we just hitched, and we got around that way. Made life a lot simpler. Look ahead and look at the trail notes for some of those costs that can add up really fast. And Far Out has tons of comments that tell you an easier, cheaper way to get around those areas. At least the cheapest company. So one of the sections, they want you to hitch a boat ride from a marina across an estuary. So get ready to be creative when it comes to transportation on this trail. There was way more involved with it than I expected. My 4th tip is very TA related, definitely Southern Hemisphere related. When it comes to trails on the Southern Hemisphere, if you are in the summertime, Christmas happens. What? And New Year's, the holidays. I virtually spent 15% of my budget, maybe 10, on Christmas alone and New Year. I was like, I'm doing such a good job. I'm hiking a long trail. I deserve all of the food and all of the presents and all of the treats. I'm going to treat myself. And that's what I did. I went hard over Christmas. I spend so much money. It's not even funny. If you know you're going to be encountering a holiday, you should probably plan ahead for that. Pre-book something, maybe get it for a deal. Plan to be in the woods, maybe a hut. Definitely don't plan on being in Auckland because it is so easy to spend money on yourself. When it comes to those holidays and those things and those areas in which you can preemptively see, I'm going to spend a lot of money when I get to Auckland or Hamilton, certain areas, Queenstown, for example, and this goes for any trail. If you're going to a big city, pre-plan a way to not destroy your budget or set aside some cash just for those areas because the temptation is too real. You're too hungry. Either pass right through town or have a plan, and that will save you a lot of money because by the time I left Auckland and I looked at my credit card statement, I was like, wow, I am definitely only eating couscous for the next month straight. So make a plan, make a budget for those high cost areas. It will save you a ton of money. And my last tip, number 5, is read the comment section in association with the trail notes. The trail notes have some information that is very good, but the comments are gold. Those far out comments, gut hook, whatever you might call it, pay for that app, pay for that map. It is worth its weight in gold. I kid you not. I got so many recommendations of ways to save my money along the way. Cheaper campsites, better campsites, free campsites, good transportation, all sorts of insider local knowledge. Thru-hiker edition is on Far Out. It's so worth it. Take some time if you're looking for a spot to camp to just pop onto those icons and read the comments. They will save you so much time and so much money. I would only plan my trip maybe a week in advance at those minute details, like reading the comments and dialing in exactly where I was going to camp. Take that time, go through there, and you will save a ton of money. All of the food recommendations, also in those comments, might soak up some of that savings, but at least you can spend it on something very enjoyable, like some food. So check those comments out, give them a read. And that's going to wrap it up. This was what I thought a very expensive trail. $6,000, $7,000. That was expensive. Plus visa and flight and gear. All of that stuff adds up to be an enormous expenditure. If this is your first trail, good luck. Hopefully you already at least have your gear. And really set yourself aside some money because here in New Zealand, freedom camping is not allowed. Hiding in the bush makes TA look bad. So please be as respectful as possible. There are certain areas where the TA trust really expects you to pay for camping, be respectful, use the long drops, and so on and so forth. So plan ahead, try and save some money where you can, and good luck. And I hope you enjoy it. And like I said, I want to know what you guys are spending on other trails. I want to know what like the PCT, CDT, AT, all that stuff costs. Leave me a comment below if you are comfortable talking about how much money you spent. And here's another side note. Beer and alcohol and cigarettes are extraordinarily expensive here. So if you're a smoker or a drinker, I didn't drink at all on the entire trail. Beer, all of that stuff is wildly expensive. Alcohol taxes are super high. All that's super expensive. Things are just a little more expensive here because we're on a remote island. Essentially, everything's expensive. Taxes are high. But get out there, do your research. This trail is completely feasible for anyone. You could do it cheaper than me. You could definitely do it a lot more expensive too. I saw some people doing that. But get out there, have some fun, and happy trails.